Ladies and gentlemen, let us now return to our topic with less artistic approaches. In around a quarter of an hour, we would like to ask you to ask questions or give us your impressions. Before that, I would like to ask you to keep your video switched off because we need all our broadcasting power to present our discussions participants. Our last discussion is called Provenance Research, Restitution, Circulation, the difficult path in dealing with collected items from colonial contexts. For this, we were able to invite three very different guests. Let me welcome Sonia Lawson. She is the director of the Palais de Lomé, which was opened in 2019 and is a culture center presenting art and culture from Togo. Our second guest is Larissa Förster, the head of the Department for Cultural and Collective Assets from Colonial Contexts at the German Center for Lost Cultural Assets. Mrs. Förster, thank you very much for being with us today. And the third among us is Didier Claes. He's the director of an art gallery in Belgium, specialized in the classical art from sub-Saharan Africa. And he's also with us today. So warm welcome to Belgium. Thank you very much for being with us.
Mr. Rahmlow, we lost Miss Lawson. She was here before, but I'm trying to get in touch with her. You just get the discussion underway and I'll try and reach her. I don't know if everybody heard this, but Miss Lawson disappeared. We will just have to bear with it. We are happy that Miss Förster and Mr. Claes are still with us now. Mr. Claes, let me start with you because on your website, on your gallery's website, there's a very important point on your biography. It says that as a kid, together with your dad in what was then Zaire, you were traveling around, visiting different villages and looking for collection items. Do you think this would still be possible today? Well, you see, I am a member of the previous and of the current generation. I'm in between. And you see, I have bought into both generations. So as a kid, I traveled to the Congolese villages and we were trying to purchase, to acquire objects. And between 1967 and 80, my father used to work for the National Museums in Kinshasa. And at the time, the then president wanted to accumulate collection items which were aimed at those exhibitions in those museums, right? In many countries, new museums arose and were set up. That was very much a tendency, a big trend at the time, and it was still possible to find such collection items, as it were. And for us, it's important to recognize that the collections were still built up in the post-colonial time. Many of these artworks would have otherwise gone adrift or be lost. And they would have also been lost because the religion and other values had disappeared all of a sudden as well. But at the time already, I discovered my passion for history, and I turned this into a profession. When we discuss what this debate, the narrative means, we often refer to Africa. But Africa consists of a variety of countries, you see, and my today's profession is one that you can't do as you could do in the past. You can't just travel to Africa and travel the countries and pick up art objects. This is something I never did in the past. You see, I maybe would have done it if I'd been given the opportunity, but it never happened. And sure, it would have been a great endeavor, traveling and, stumbling or finding objects, but the times have changed. Today, it takes way in a different format. You see, the objects had already been found in the pre-colonial time. You see, as to what I did with my dad, well, my dad trained me. He taught me how to collect items, and he taught me about the relationship of locals to their items and their artworks. And I'm here to talk on this topic. You see, at the time, right, and I'm specifically focusing on Congo, you see, you have to understand that Africa consists of a plethora of countries, but then the locals on the ground didn't really think much of their collection items at the time. It didn't attach a lot of value. So today we talk about restitution. Restitution to what, and what kind of emotions does that entail? Right. Later on, we will discuss this with our guests as well, but I would like to talk about what you just mentioned and pass on the question to Ms. Förster. There was an important sentence, and it's about developing a sense of emotion for the relationship between locals and those objects. Now, Ms. Förster, you are an expert on research, on provenance research, and I'm sure this is something you always do and have to do in your museums. You always have to try and find out if those objects can be tied back and connected to the original owners and communities, right? Can you give us an example of how you work? Of course. Thank you so much for this debate and for this very international conference. It's great we make use of online solutions for what is a transnational debate. Now, as for my work, well, we financially support and we also help with awareness raising as far as provenance research goes, right? It's a research that asks the question, where do our museum items come from? Now, A, through which hands have they traveled? And then B, the discussion is also about, now, how were they used? How were they crafted? How were they obtained, acquired in their former communities? Whom did they belong to? What's their histories? And how did the handover actually happen? You see, in our post-colonial provenance research, obviously, we have to examine colonialism and recognize that colonialism obviously is a big unrightful context, unlawful context, and so the acquisition has happened oftentimes under unlawful contexts. So provenance research is key, and provenance research often asks the question, where from, right? But as you rightly said, in many cases, that's impossible without embarking together on a way, and when I say together, I mean with colleagues and scientists, researchers, culture workers, artists, with custodians on the ground, and to embark on a journey together and try and reconstruct, retrace histories of items. We also try and understand how this reconstruction pathway, what can it mean for us today? Also, is there a future for those objects in our current museums? Where's the future? Is it here? Is it there? Where is it going to take place? And does it have a future with their original communities? You see, and oftentimes the decision making is made or takes place at a case-by-case basis, depending on the institution, depending on the nation states, depending on the communities. And my job is to support this process. Right. Now, when we discuss or talk about future, we will often ask ourselves or ask, what does future even entail? What does it involve? I'm really happy to announce that Ms. Lawson is now with us. Ms. Lawson, thank you very much and welcome to the Academy and Trees. You are the director of the Palais de Lomé, a culture center for African culture in Togo. And now we heard two buzzwords, two important points by Ms. Claes. He mentioned to develop a sense or connection between objects and emotion, and to look into the future, to try and understand what the future can be. Now, when we talk about Togo, it used to be a German colony, and then was administrated by France up until its independence. Right, in order to develop a sense for the future, what does Togo require vis-a-vis its collection items still residing in Europe? Today, the term borrowing came up, but also the term of, unconditioned reconstitution came up as well. So we have to return everything that used to belong to Togo. What does Togo need, in your opinion? Right. Togo has a special history located in the western part of Africa. It was occupied first by the Germans and then by the French. So its legacy is or belongs to or is characterized by Germany and France. Of course, it's a very hot topic in our country. You see, for us, it's about a relationship to our own past, which in the wake of which comes many questions, the question about our history, the question, what was our history, right? Those art pieces are to be found in France, in Germany, and also reside in US American-based or UK-based museums and cultural institutions. And of course, we would like to research and to understand what will happen with those objects. But of course, the object histories matters as well, right? What are the objects about? Are those ritual items? Are those objects which were used for, very traditional rites of sort? And we want to know what the previous or the prehistory of those objects were. History which still resides or lives within our own traditions and routines. So restitution is very important, but we have to keep this in mind when we talk about restitution, because it's a backdrop. I'd love to talk to you about questions which will be of importance in the future as well. For instance, Western perspective often is about how to return objects, but African perspective is like what will come of them, because those objects have lived many different lives. An African life in a pre-colonial time, then during colonialism, they've lived a life, and then they traveled to Europe and then lived in yet another life and greatly influenced European collections and artwork. And now we know that with or after their restitution, they will start a third life because they will be brought back to Africa. I believe that this is a turning point for all those pieceworks. And I think it's very interesting to talk a bit more about this subject. You see, the different African communities or European communities hosting the objects is a specific phenomenon. Hosting objects has an impact, and it's important to understand or to look at what kind of emotion that sparks and what emotional connection is in each individual community. And I believe it's fair to say that the curiosity is still high in Togo. Right. It's interestingly enough, one of your research projects, the one you support, focuses on Togo. It's objects of two museums, one in Leipzig, the other one in Dresden. It's a research project which is still ongoing. Can you give us some early insights in terms of the scope? You see, when we talk about objects which were unlawfully acquired and made their way into Europe. You see, you mentioned two museums, one in Leipzig, one in Dresden. It's an ongoing research project, yes. But as for Togo, Ms. Lawson, would be interesting to exchange our experiences, because I believe without a transnational debate, we won't make inroads and won't advance as far as the future of those objects is concerned, right? So the research project examines 700 objects and tries to identify the owners or the collectors. This is the first detail that matters when we do provenance research, because we often don't know who crafted those items, who were the previous owners. So we are trying to figure out or identify who the colonial owners were, who joined colonial expeditions to go and discover the what was then colony Togo, but also during raids, those objects were acquired. So our research project looks at the inventory, and it's supported by Togolese colleagues from the Lomé-based National Archives. And we try to get a better understanding of the acquisition context, get an understanding of just how much violence was in play. This is a key question for us and for our center. Whenever we fund provenance research, we want to make sure that with our results, leads to restitution, and that we are aware of problematic acquisition contexts, and only then will the restitution negotiations start. So the Togolese case is just one of many former German colonies we focus on. We also research other European or other former German colonies, but also French colonies, a subject of our research study. You know, talking about China, Boxer insurgents. We try and provide funding in a way that international museums can connect and establish a good network to tackle better provenance research and restitution. Right. I would like to ask Claes, because you were attentively listening, I could tell. Now, can you see some parallels in terms of what you experience as a gallerist in Belgium?
It's very interesting what you just heard. I think that very often when you only talk about Africa as a single entity, this happens very often. We just talked about Togo, but there's one thing I find very interesting. Mrs. Förster spoke about the provenance and about Germany and the ties to other countries, and tries really to understand the background of these objects. And this is a different approach than the approach of other countries, which take a look at all objects of colonial times as of one era, regardless of the background of each object. African artists have created very different items of art, which are now in different countries of the world. In France and Belgium, there are art objects which were even made for Europeans, for the white people, and we don't want them to be restituted, do we? But it is very important that we really understand where an item of art comes from, that we understand the complete prehistory from its origin to where it is now. And I really am very committed to supporting and restituting objects of art, but there are objects which have a very tragic history, which are connected to certain events of a certain era or to a certain country, and we must not forget about that. At the same time, and Mrs. Lawson also mentioned that we have objects of art which came to us in a second step. So first we've got the issue of provenance, of their prehistory. Maybe they know where they were taken from. Maybe they were even taken from certain communities or peoples illegally. At least today we know that this was illegally because we look at those times from a different angle today. Maybe at that time it was perfectly legal to do so. But today, as Mrs. Lawson rightfully said, there is a different approach. So we have to know what to do with these objects. Do we bring them back to where they come from? But where do they come from? I know many African countries. Today, many peoples are different from the peoples Europeans took these art objects from. There has been a certain development in Africa in terms of their traditions and religions. So the question is where to give these objects back to. The African peoples haven't given up their traditions just because they were deprived of these objects. These objects were a means of living their traditions, but an object of art that is no longer as holy as it was considered 100 years ago, because traditions have changed, does not have the same meaning today. However, we want to bring these objects back in order to make them holy again, but this can't work. Mrs. Lawson rightfully said so. In the public institutions, in museums, it really makes sense to exhibit these objects again for other generations to find them, to reinvent them, to get to know them. But what is a museum? A museum is a European or at least a Western invention. Museums weren't invented in Africa. This is a secular invention from Europe or the Western world. It is a Western model that we want to bring to Africa now, an idea of museums. Back at that times, art objects were not visible to the people in Africa. Today, there are museums which display such objects for everybody. That's very fine, but maybe I'm a little bit too harsh, but um, people in the West say, we've taken away everything from you, and now we bring these things back to you and ask you to exhibit these things in a certain way. But that doesn't work that way. Some countries have shown that they are very ambitious and try to give culture a certain meaning. Recently, I traveled to Abidjan, and the youngest museum of Abidjan was founded in 1948. Formerly, it was just a ceremonial hall. And that doesn't mean that we should not give things back to this place, but we definitely should talk about how this is going to happen. We cannot just build new museums and bring things there. That won't work. Because then Europeans could just pass these things back and say, here you are, and now do with these objects what you want.
Frau Lawson, hören Sie mich?
Mrs. Lawson, do you hear me? I think Mr. Claes raised very many different issues now. He also mentioned how we could get rid of this Western view. Of course, a museum is an invention of the Western world, that's true. How can we display objects of art in a different way? How can we give these objects back to the peoples? Even Africa before the colonial era is not the same Africa as it is today. The communities have changed, they have developed, and today Africa tries to create nations in places where formerly there were only communities. Today's countries are different from the countries from the pre-colonial era. So an African approach is definitely different from the approach of Europe. And I think that maybe this approach is not sustainable enough. We must not speak about Africa as a whole. We can only talk about the different countries because they have different traditions. And the question really is, with what kind of approach do we want to deal with the subject? How do we want to deal with the question of restitution? When in 2014, I just would like to tell you what I experienced back then. Palais de Lomé was belonged to Germany and then to France. So it was under the patronage of two different countries. And in 2014, I became the director of this palais, and we rebuilt it. And then we asked ourselves the question, what do we want to do with our heritage? Some people said that it's a European heritage, but then I said, no, it's Togo's heritage. Maybe it was founded by Germans or by French, but actually this is an institution from Togo. It is an institution where we can display our own objects. And that was the background against which we organized our first exhibition. We wanted to show the power of the colonies. So for me, the question is, what do we want to exhibit and how do we want to exhibit it? In 2014, when I declared that I want to make an international institution from this palais, there was a lot of skepticism, also among my Western colleagues. They said, you're not going to get any art objects. That was in 2014. Now in 2021, nobody says such things any longer. People have changed their opinions, and I think that Africans are being taken seriously now. For a very long time, the question was asked whether Africans are able at all to deal with these objects of art in a correct way. Now, let me come back to what Mr. Claes just said. How can we develop our own African approach that does not look like a continuation of the European one? What we did was that we tried to present a heritage that was widely unknown. Peoples had developed further, and certain objects of art were hidden in the communities because they were not there in order to be shown. They were not treated as objects as they would have been in Europe, but they were part of the traditional life in these communities. And we are lucky to have these different communities. We were able to approach them and get the objects from them, and we exhibited them. This is something very special because with this, we showed that we are interested in this history, and we explained these communities that we want to show objects from their history and traditions to other communities too. But of course, we were also asked how we will exhibit these objects, and we followed an approach that differs from the European approaches, for example, from the German one. Whenever you organize exhibitions, you've got a certain number of objects, you know in which museum or institution you will find this object, then you approach collectors, and so on. In Africa, things were different. We had to approach local communities and ask them, what do you want to show? What parts of your tradition do you want us to display? So it was a completely different approach. Maybe it's a little bit more classic, or I don't know. But we wanted to show objects, and we wanted to cooperate with the communities in order to asked them what they wanted to show. And we tried to make these different objects available for everybody. For me, it seems very important to include all local communities. So on the one hand, Mrs. Lawson said that between 2014 and 2021, things have changed. Mr. Claes mentioned that many museums still have very European ways of thinking and approaches to how to present collection items. What is your impression? You probably also deal with the colonial context and also with the emergence of European collections. I think the project Mrs. Lawson is organizing is incredibly interesting. She tries to reinterpret the colonial architecture and tries to anchor the objects both locally and internationally. What comes to my mind is that in the European institutions, we have very little imagination of what kinds of appropriation and reinterpretation exist all over the world, also in African countries. Sometimes, for example, I talk to colleagues from Cameroon, and they tell me about the palace museums in the grasslands and of ways of how to display royal objects of arts, of restoring these objects in their museum work. Some European museums have very interesting cooperations with them. And when I listen to them, I realize that we know much too little about the dynamism that is going on, both in urban African regions and in rather rural contexts. And I really have to say that I trust these countries, that they're going to find interesting ways of including these objects into their collections in a participatory way, cooperating with local communities, ways that we in Europe could take an example from, that we could learn from, because these are new ways of working in museums in the 21st century after an era of colonialism in a very diverse society, as many African communities are. Mr. Claes, do you also think that Europeans are able to do that?
Well, I don't know what you mean. Like, do I think they will be able to do it? I don't know if I summarize it well. Does it summarize it more or less, Ms. Förster? Yes. Right, because just to give you a better idea, we talked about this today. In the Savoir report, it triggered a lot. It set off a trend, but we now see that things haven't picked up the pace like we thought it would back in 2018. There are legal roadblocks, so there's a lot of red tape, so things are slower than we thought. So that was the context, Mr. Claes. And so in this context, I'm asking, do you think they will be able to do it? Okay. Now, let me reference history here. You see, at the end of the day, we have moved a long way, come a long way. You see, the Televent Museum in Belgium has already restituted 61 objects to Kinshasa. And nobody talked about that. That was in 1961, 75 objects. You see, nobody talks about this anymore. And so those objects were put into big boxes, into chests, and there was one case where there was a signature missing, and it all was cancelled at the last moment. You see, the African countries have times and again made claims, and applied, but the answer always came back negative. It was always a no. So you see, what bothers me is, as you can see, I've different backgrounds. My parents come from different backgrounds, different countries, so I'm a bit of a mix myself. So I do have this heritage within, though I live in Europe, and what I want to recognize that the objects that are put on display in Europe, which are important to Africa, are recognized as such. Sure, there is the fear that upon returning the objects, that all European museums will end up being empty, but I don't think it'll come that long so far. I don't think so. My feeling is that today, people often say, well, we've found a solution, so we will just return everything, and then we can then forget about everything, and then that's reconciliation. They will forgive us. I don't think so, though. You see, what Africa needs is not to deplete European museums and for all objects to be returned and to give them a new home in Africa. No, I think that Africa should take a very specific approach to see what can be done. Like, is Germany already ready to restitute certain objects to, say, Egypt? You see, Egypt hasn't made any claims for a very long time. You can't simply deplete, empty one museum and then just build up another one and populate it with all those items, right? Just imagine Africans come to Europe, taking a look, and then picking objects and saying, we take this and this and this. This is not how it's happening. If I had it my way, I would suggest to take a look at every European country to see what the ties to African history is, and then return the objects. Africa or Egypt is already doing that with Nefertiti, for instance, and I think their approach is a right one. And every country has a different heritage. You see, in France and Benin, there were 27 art pieces which were restituted or were to be restituted from France to Benin, and the key item was not restituted. 26 were returned, but it wasn't about those 26. It was about the 27th, which France didn't want to give back. Right, and the same holds true for Germany. Okay, what's key in your opinion? Which object was that? Well, it was a steel statue from the 18th century portraying a Beninese king. It's an art object which is part of Beninese heritage, which was the only one which wasn't returned. So, and now it belongs to the French heritage, but this is what Benin was actually asking for, right? This was what was important to them. I was in Congo last month. There are great museums. There are 50,000 objects in all those collections or in those exhibitions. Do you believe that Congo requires even more items? Where's the space to put them on display even? Right? But the mask Lububa should be returned to Congo because it's a key item of their heritage, right? And this is what this is all about, to take a close look at which work pieces or individual items are important, which should be returned. It's great to talk about Africa, right? Most Africans, or many Africans, didn't even ask for anything. I mean, of course, depends on which country, I mean, right? But Ms. Lawson, you're right. You mention Africa, but then also say, but we have different nation states within Africa, right? But then Europeans always refer to Africa. When Emmanuel Macron says, I will return African heritage, like, this is super arrogant, right? It couldn't be more arrogant. There are so many different countries. Sounds like Sarkozy many years ago. You can't say something like that. And you can't simply return those objects to random countries, where all of a sudden where the jihadists are in power. So for me, it's about the right approach. We're trying to move away from the former, the notion of being the colonizer. You see, we don't want to move away from Europeans deciding for Africa, right? But it's important to share experiences and to discuss our different approaches. Emmanuel Macron's discourse, or his speech, at least made sure this topic was put in the limelight, which hadn't been the case before. This hadn't been a public debate in the time before. Now the public is aware. They know about this topic. Sure, it's not the broad public I'm talking about, but at least it's been a trending topic. It's now moved to the forefront, which wasn't the case in the past. Yes, of course. However, but he raised false hopes. Ms. Förster, do you agree? Sorry for butting in. Ms. Claes says, like, Mr. Claes said, he raised false hopes, and Ms. Lawson, you seem to be a bit more lenient in that respect. Ms. Förster, can you please give me your account? Yeah, your work has been ongoing for 2 years. You're heading the cultural department and historical department for provenance research and from colonial contexts. You have 2 years of experience. Do you think there are certain hopes or expectations connected to that? Right, so the mere fact that we exist for the loss of cultural goods and heritage is a consequence of Macron's speech, to put it bluntly. Right, I started researching colonialism in the year 2000, and then I did some field research as an ethnographer. I went to Namibia, researching how did Namibians experience the colonial war, and so I have 20 years of experience. So my experience is that, sure, this speech changed the needle, the report changed the needle, and changed the international discourse and the awareness. In 2004, it was unconceivable. So we did a genocide exhibition then, stating that the genocide was the key starting point. And today we sometimes have like daily headlines or articles writing about colonialism. So this is something that can't be inverted. Something has changed for the better. I'm really happy this has changed. However, it is true to be cautious. We have to be cautious to always question the right path and the right pace, discussing that. You see, I often think that all institutions and the policymakers have awakened. There is this reckoning process going on, has been ongoing for some years, and they're now accepting this new trend. So we won't impose our schedules upon the former colonized countries. So in the context of Namibia, for instance, the deliberation processes, the opinion forming processes go on that way. This is important. Also, are we interested in the unlawfulness, or when we research those objects, are we attempting to perspectivize our own history and to get a better access, different access to our own history? Why do we want to restitute those objects? What do we want to do with them? What are our expectations towards those objects, right? This is an ongoing process, and I dare say that we have to be attentively listening first and try and understand what's the motivation on the other side of the table after colonization and its consequences, or in some parts, what's happening still up until the 1990s. So we've discovered the problem, but we won't be able to just get rid of the problem by returning the objects. No, we have to focus and we have to come to terms with our examination and just let it sink in and try and figure out what our role is, who we are. compared to the colonizing countries back in the day. How can we join around one table and negotiate restitutions? And of course, Germany and Namibia are closely connected, and there is a museum debate, an important one. I believe that this is the context in which we should discuss all other questions. Is it enough? Isn't it enough? But the big questions will be answered in a museum context. So as a museum, we have to always ask the big historical justice question. Okay, so for you, it's justice, future, respectful coexistence, right? Those are the big issues you mentioned. But of course, I jotted down pace and the approach and the pathway. Those are items I've written down, but I want to ask our other participants and open up the floor, the discussion to more participants. I did see some raised hands before. Please raise your hand, the first one. This is Andreas again. Andreas Schlotauer. I'm a journalist, writer of your news magazine, and I wrote in two questions, or some questions. Now, Togo. I know those two museums. We see chains, baskets, arrows, knives, spears in those museums in Leipzig and Dresden. This doesn't necessarily fall under the category of art. I'm really curious as to whether those the Togolese people will consider those things art if they really want to have them returned, because Togolese craftsmen also made masks which are now highly valued in the market and were also on display in extraordinary exhibitions in German museums. So the objects that are to be returned should also be identified first. You see, we talk about restitution, but we might consider moving away from the discussion and consider which options to return. Now, Uganda. In the past few years, the museum in Uganda has a collection of 200,000 objects. It was built by a German architect and British command. Collection was built in the 1950s, and so the collection has been the same ever since. And whenever my colleagues say, so they went to Cote d'Ivoire or Mali, and when new museums are founded, often the Americans or Germans or Europeans have their finger in the pie. So my colleagues often ask about African governments. You see, in those countries, you don't find any contemporary art museums, simply because the government has different priorities. Okay, let's discuss the Togo part. Ms. Lawson, please, your comment.
Yes, I think if we talk about the African governments now, then it's a difficult topic. Very often I ask myself that, of course, Africa is a continent which is not very wealthy. So the question is whether culture plays a big role. But the answer is yes, of course, culture plays a big role on our continent. And it is important for us to know that we have a certainty about our cultural heritage, because this is necessary for us to imagine our future. So culture does play a big role, and I think we must not forget about that. We need this culture in order to imagine our future, and this is very important. Now, to come back to Togo, I don't know what you call an object, because there are objects which have no value at first glance, but which are very valuable to us. For example, I once saw an object a piece of clothing. And I understood what this was made for. I understood that this piece of clothing had a certain meaning. It was a protective gear aimed at protecting people at times of fire. And things get a different meaning once you get to know what they were made for. And of course, if somebody sees such objects in Berlin, Leipzig, or Dresden, then they can ask themselves, what is this piece of clothing made for? And if they don't know about it, then the object does not have any value for them. But the value has a meaning in the place it came from. From an aesthetic point of view or a monetary point of view, an object can be worthless, but it can have a big value for the community the object comes from. We know that the monetary value is always something different as a symbolic value. Maybe I answered your question. Thank you very much. We've got more people on our speakers list. Okay, now we had Mr. Mbembele tried to contribute to our discussion several times. Mr. Mbembele, are you with us now? We've got you on our list. There he is. Welcome.
Vous m'entendez? Ja, wir brauchen.
Can you hear me?
Oui. Alors. Muss aber. Machen wir. C'est bon?
Can you hear me now?
Mal sehen. Aber wir hören Sie ja auf jeden Fall.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Ah, c'est bon. Je crois que ça devait marcher en fait. Voilà.
Just a second.
Je voudrais intervenir par rapport à certaines.
Okay. I wanted to address several things you mentioned. I am currently in Kinshasa, at the University of Kinshasa. Here, I teach art history, the art history of Congo. I wanted to come back to some issues that you have mentioned, that Mr. Claes has mentioned. I understood very well what he said, but I also had the impression that when you, Mr. Claes, spoke about 60,000 art objects in the Kinshasa museums, I think that these are figures from the 70s. In fact, there were 45,000 objects, which are no longer the objects we have today because the museums in Congo had very many problems after the 90s. They were raided, they were destroyed, objects were destroyed by weather conditions, for example, because of that, we don't know how many objects still exist. But the question of restitution is a legal question, isn't it? Isn't it our right to get these objects back? They have left Africa or Congo, and in fact, they belong to us. And it's the right of Africans and Congolese to get these objects back. And just to say that they were all holy objects, and when they come back to Africa, they should be used again and become holy again, I think this is the wrong answer to the question. If you think of how Africa looked like before colonial times, then not all art objects were holy objects. Not at all. Some objects were exhibited just like that. They didn't have a big meaning. They were not necessarily holy objects, were they? I would like to answer your comment. I agree with you. Not all objects were holy objects, but of course you cannot generalize. And that's true. Yes, you are right. Not all objects were holy ones, but restitution is our right, and we must not forget that. It is a right that we should definitely get access to. And when we talk about the context of the restitution, then this is very closely connected to the individual history of each country. If you look at today's Africa, be it English-speaking or French-speaking Africa, then you will see that there is a new dynamism. Most of the countries have understood that it is very important to preserve our heritage and to maintain it and to show it. Today, most countries of Africa estimate their culture very highly. If we look back to the colonial times of Congo, which were between 1930 and 1960, when we were a Belgian colony, Congolese went to museums very often, much more often than Europeans, in fact. Thank you very much. Mr. Claes, would you like to answer?
Bonjour, chers compatriotes. Effectivement,
Yes, of course. You mentioned 45,000 objects. That's correct, but I added all other items of art or documents of art. That is why I talked about 60,000 objects. I come from Congo, and I don't want to mention all problems the country has gone through and all civil conflicts which had an influence on the state of the objects. Many of them just disappeared. A large part were destroyed. Some were not stored correctly and can no longer be exhibited in some rooms. Rainwater entered and so on. But I love my country and I don't want to speak about difficulties only. I would like to mention other things as well. Unfortunately, now once you have mentioned these difficulties, I have to mention them as well. But yesterday's Congo is not the same as it is today. In Western museums, there were also raids. There were also objects that were destroyed. We must not forget that. You know, the topic is a very complex one. And, you know, Congo, that is 82 times bigger than Belgium. It's 10 times bigger than France. And Africa is even bigger. You cannot generalize. I know Congo very well. And culture is part of my DNA. But during colonial times, there were sculptures, there were markets, art markets. I've got photographs of different times showing that the indigenous population was selling these objects. You know, sometimes we forget that our ancestors also had a very close relation to art and culture. And some of these objects were made for the white who came to visit us. They received them as gifts. So a certain number of objects were exclusively made for white people. And that is why some statues, for example, were made only after 1948. In the Barimba community, there was a situation where the people was accused that art objects were not made. And but it was not that difficult. I just want to say that we can't say that everything has to be restituted. I'm very much committed to the cause of restitution, but I also know African history, and we know that certain African objects were made for white people. And I don't think that we would not believe in our masks today, even if the white people wouldn't have been here, had not been with us. You speak about royal families, about for example, presents that were made from one king to another, bronze statues were made and gifted to others. We must not forget about that. Of course, there were crimes committed in Africa, that is clear. There is looted art from Africa, we know about that. But there were also transactions, legal transactions. We know that in Portugal, the Portuguese took certain things with them, which they received as presents. Should we take them back from them? In Côte d'Ivoire, I met a very old man, 108 years old. And I told him that all over the world, his objects of art are exhibited. He was very happy. And then we told him that we will bring his masks back to Africa, and he started to cry. Well, I was really impressed by Congolese art, which I saw for the first time in Europe. I think that this is very beautiful art, and I don't say that for you to be happy, but this is what happened. Yes, but I think the participant knows much more about this topic than I do. But what sometimes unnerves me is that we have a certain mindset, but in fact, things are much more difficult. Mrs. Förster put it rightly. What Macron said opened up a new debate, that's right. If we send Felvin Sarr and Benedict Savoy to Africa, then we will get a report. The report is not everything, but it opened a debate. And sorry. I would like to add some more voices to our debate. We have about 10 minutes left for our discussion, and that is why I have to interrupt you, although this is very impolite. Mr. Baker, would you like to add something to our discussion? Emeka Undemba, can you hear us? Would you like to add something? Please switch on your camera if you hear us. Can you hear us? Welcome.
Hello?
And switch on your microphone, please.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Ja, ich
Can
kann
you
Sie
hear me?
hören.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks so much for the very interesting program. My contribution, actually, like I'm an artist, I'm also run a space in Lagos, Nigeria. And I'll first of all say that the question of restitution is first of all, just to concur with some other speakers, a very legal right of the Africans to get restitution. I think the issue is not about actually, I think the issue should be how this issue should be done. You know, because you cannot take something away from somebody illegally and somehow you say, I give it back to you, but I'm going to tell you how you're going to keep what I took away from you. So I think in that sense, I think I think we're still thinking so European in that sense that like probably most of the voices think that Africa is still a colonial territory of Europeans. So the thing is that like there has to be a kind of a meeting of on an equal basis. Let me put it that way, on equal basis to. I think the first step Europeans are doing to say, look, we took these things illegally, and we have to find a way to if you wanted to get the items back, to get it back to you. But I think we should be talking about more of the collaboration, because I think we passed this. I think we've gone beyond the time to just saying this belongs to me or this doesn't belong to me. I think we should put more energy on how do we collaborate, how do we share, because all these art pieces, whether they are old or new, I feel belong to humanity. So I think the question is, how do we make it work for both Africa and Europe? How do we, because you find out that the taking away of all these art pieces in Africa actually is one of the key problems why Africa today is constricted in their own identity. Because you can, if you come to Europe, you can follow the trajectory through the art of European civilization. So you can really follow it up. But if you come to Africa, because of colonialism, it's been interrupted so massively that, you know, there's a big disruption. So having said that, as I said, I think we should be thinking of how do we make it work for everybody, instead of just trying to, you know, almost like as people in a fight of give me this, give me that, I don't want to give you, it belongs to me, or whatever. I think it'd be more productive to say, you know, like for example, in Germany, I know there's something they call Stadtvertrag, where the state, maybe, for example, the Jewish state makes kind of an agreement with the state, okay, how do we kind of, I won't call it compensation, but how do we kind of make something bad right, in the sense that a country like France or maybe even the European Union could do something like that in that case, okay, how do we have to set up systems or you know, that will support your own idea of museum? Because I feel that, like, if Africa wants to do something that will fit within the African context, Africa should not have this idea of the European museum, you know, because our system in Africa is different. If we uproot this kind of European system of the museum to Africa, you will find out that it will not work.
Vielleicht können wir da das letzte Wort nochmal an Frau Lawson.
Okay, Ms. Lawson, maybe final comment on the question, just how much dialogue is required, how much dialogue is still useful? Right. This is a very important question. So I want to rule out any misunderstandings. So let me clearly state that we are looking for a cooperation and partnership at eye level in order to talk about the question that is, how can we return those objects to Africa in a sensible way? It's not about setting up museums in Africa. In the Palais de Lomé, we try to put them in exhibitions in a different way, and our exhibitions, our art collections showcasing African art is in part an exhibition which explains the different values and histories of the items. You see, in Togo, talking is very important. There are many sayings. By means of those art items, we explain that. A lot is happening at the moment. You know about the Benin bronzes, Nigeria and Benin. We don't know what museum this will be, but we for sure know that it won't be a European museum. And we know it's also key to talk about the exhibition and how to arrange it. And I believe this is important. The exchange of experiences matters. We don't simply want to adopt the European model, which not necessarily would work even in our countries. So yes, we give it a lot of thought. It's a process which has started or was started. Ms. Lawson, thank you very much. She and Mr. Claes and Ms. Förster, you were part of our very lively discussion under the trees, Academy under the trees. Thank you so much. We could go on for hours. Thanks to Sonia Lawson from Togo, Palais de Lomé. Thank you so much to Larissa Förster, the head of Department of Colonial Contextualized Lost Cultural Goods of the Foundation for Lost Objects. And thanks to Belgium, to Didier Claes, he's a gallerist focusing on sub-Saharan African art. Unfortunately, we don't have this extra hour, but I would like to invite you to keep discussing after this conference is over. We've come here to discuss together, but in a final session, I would like to broaden our perspective. We've mentioned this. Ms. Förster touched upon this briefly. This is not only about restitution or art, cultural objects. It all entails or involves much bigger question: respect, coexistence, and future. This is why I'm glad to announce that we will be having with us Geneviève Ansel. She is the director of the Dialogue on Humanité Lyon. She has been part of this forum. She's part of this, and she's going to give the floor to everybody who would like to participate. Geneviève Ansel, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I believe that we have put into practice our Academy under trees, which was lively and exactly how we had envisaged it. And when I say we, I mean the Dialogue on Humanité. This is great. We've gained insights and made sure we get a better understanding for one another. And Mr. Claes is right, of course. We've just begun our journey. It's a long journey, but it's an important one. Our remembrance process or work is a very important work. We know from the past that everybody believes they are right. Everybody's got their own perspective, and there comes a tipping point and complexity which has to be factored into our discussion. I believe we all should be attentive. We should listen to one another, and we should make sure that we make headway together. We've heard that there are multiple solutions and ideas. The political decision makers should make sure that this topic is put at the top of the agenda, even if it's only for opportunistic reasons. Over the past 15 years, we've seen how important it is that those questions voiced are also being heard. And upon considering the last 15 years, which is little time, we will realize that a lot has changed, but a lot is still lying ahead of us. It's something we will have to face up. And I think that the Dialogue on Humanité will provide assistance in that context. We've learned a great deal from different cultures, the voodoo culture and others as well. And we try to understand and to bear in mind that, under the trees of Salvador Bahia, that there are different approaches, different perspectives. The few Europeans that came to that gathering didn't exhibit or didn't display a neo-European or Eurocentric perspective. So how can we understand each other? You see, this is a question that arises wherever objects are displayed. This question can only be tackled and answered by listening attentively. Some objects are connected to life, others to death. And we have to know that. is destroying objects an option? Is that something we don't want to hear? Should we consider it? You see, we have to be able to grasp the complexity, and how can we know what we will need for the future in order to progress? You see, because we don't simply want to lead the way, we do not want to repeat the violent acts of our ancestors. We want to advance together. But due to our psychology of today, we tend to turn a blind eye. So I believe together we can share our perspectives and insights, and we've charted a way into the future. And I believe that we have to rethink our perspective. We have to develop or shed light on our world in a decolonialized way, so that we can advance, always bearing in mind our emotions. This is both symbolic but also an emotional act. It clearly shows that what it means to live passion. Didier Claes just showed this, showing emotions, living this passionately every day matters as well. So the topic, which is a complex one, there is the possibility to better understand one another. And we have to live the cooperation, and we have to revive it, because after all, it's about human beings. Once we've understood this, I believe we will be able to make headway, at least with those who seek to do so and those who wish to do so. And this will help us to grow stronger, to further evolve in many other aspects of life as well. There is no silver bullet. There is humility. So when we met in Lyon, when we launched this format in Lyon for the first time, we tried to focus on Africa as well. We had André de Charbonnet and other guests. And whenever we talk about this issue, you see, over the past few years, we shared our experiences, which were plentiful. And this is what we want to showcase. The Genshagen Foundation at Genshagen with Angelika Eder and Nathalie Kaufmann has contributed to showing what Europe actually needs, which is establishing a connection to the South. This exchange has to take place. It's vital, and everybody has to carry their weight and really make an effort. This is the human potential, human diversity. This is what it all comes down to. Thank you so much, and I wholeheartedly invite you to join us in Lyon between the 2nd and the 4th of July for our dialogue on humanité. Thank you very much for your final remarks. She made it very clear that we are always discussing against the backdrop of a much bigger picture. So I would like to pass on my words of thanks to all those participants who've actively participated, to our active listeners who have been listening for those many hours. Thank you so much to all our guests. If you like, please go to Wonder. Okay, where am I? Sorry, it's not. It's called Wonder Me. Apologies. This is where we will be able to follow the discussion. So we've started exchanging opinions and experiences, and we can continue to do so. Now, my last words of thanks will go, and Geneviève Ansel just mentioned this, goes to the Genshagen Foundation, which has organized the Academy Under the Trees. So I would like to give the floor to the organizer of today's event. I would like to thank everybody for your attention, for your input, for your time. And wherever you are, I wish you a sunny and pleasant day. Goodbye. I don't want to take up much more of your time. I would like to thank you on behalf of our foundation. I'm so grateful for your perspectives. It's been so plentiful, a plethora of different opinions. Listening to that was very refreshing. Thank you so much for that. And thanks to the translators who've made this possible. Goodbye and see you next time.